everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today, I'm honoured and delighted to be speaking with the MD of 21 Leadership, Richard Nugent. Richard, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Delighted to be here. I've been really looking forward to it, Dan.
Well, we've been talking over the years, about the last decade, hasn't it been, Richard? And I think we were saying off air, this is the first time we've met properly.
Yes, it's incredible, and there's this small group of people who I feel like I've got a real affinity with, who almost I feel like I've gone through a similar journey at a similar time scale, and had similar successes and challenges that I include you in that. So it's brilliant to be able to speak to you and to share some of the work that we've been doing over the last 15 years with the listeners as well.
I'm really excited to talk about that work. And I think to start off, why don't you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Great, yeah. So what I'm most known for is as being the managing director of I guess what you call these days a boutique leadership consultancy. We're relatively small. The majority of the clients we work with are actually corporate clients, but we work with big blue chip companies. Over the years, we've worked with people like Samsung, Milne Entertainment, who are the biggest theme park company in the world. We work with the biggest travel company in Europe. But alongside that, since about 2005, I've been working primarily in football, also a little bit of cricket and other sports as well. And initially it was one-to-one work with players, so almost like a one-to-one mental coach outside of clubs. And then for at least 10 years I've been working with League Managers Association, training managers, both newer up and coming managers and head coaches, but also I've worked with master classes with various kind of big names, and that's led me to work in a handful of clubs as well. So I think it's a really nice rich mix. But what it also allows me to do is map over some really good research and insights and models from outside of the sports world into the sports world, and that's something I'm really proud of. We've been really successful at making a difference with approaches that aren't the kind of normal, I guess, sports psych type of approaches.
I've known you over the years for working in sport, as you mentioned, especially football, soccer. But you've done a lot in the last decade on the corporate side. Big differences between the two?
Oh, that's a great question. Absolutely yes and no. So in sport is a unique environment. Football is an even more unique environment. So there are some very big differences, and actually I'm always very careful about what can we learn from football that we can apply in business. I'm not a huge fan of leadership books by head coaches, managers, at least in terms of them impacting on the corporate world, and vice versa, because just the environments are very, very different. Having said that, when it comes to leadership and when it comes to developing high performance cultures, there are some principles that are absolutely the same in football, in cricket, in the sporting world as in the corporate world. How you apply them is different when you closely tailor for the audience, but the principles behind, for example, what makes a great leader in a dressing room, a great leader as a manager or a head coach, they are the same characteristics as you would want from a chief executive or an MD or a chairman of a big organization.
I suspect my next question is going to be, what would those principles and characteristics be, Richard?
Yeah, so I guess it's a great place to start, because I think if I only have a group of people who are interested in leadership for 10 or 15 minutes, there are a number of characteristics that are shared, because they're simple and easy to apply. They're certainly simple and easy to self-audit to make sure you're doing them. and they're really well researched. So the initial basis of it, just for those people who like a bit of research and a bit of extra reading, is two American guys called Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, over the years, based in the States, have done surveys for 35 years now, surveys of people, and ask them, what makes you follow a leader? Now, to me, that's a much more interesting question and approach than the vast majority of other leadership stuff that's out there. Because a lot of the other leadership stuff that's out there is, what did Alex Ferguson do? What does Pep do? What does, ex-leader in cricket or in rugby? Or what did Steve Jobs do? Or Richard Branson? And the challenge with that is none of us are those people, unless they happen to be listening. So that kind of leadership stuff is based on us trying to be something very different. So the fact that Kouzes and Posner started this research that says, right, what as follower, what makes you follow a leader? That I got really interested really quickly. And then having followed the research for 15 years now, nearly 20 years now, and then, mapped all the way back to when they started 35 years ago, what's really interesting is from a range of about 40 characteristics, 40, the top 4 characteristics have pretty much consistently been the top 4 characteristics over those period. And this is like 2 million people all around the world, all different environments, industries, they'll include sport as well. So I look at that kind of as a very simple model and say, right, it appears these are probably the most important 4 things. And then, of course, over the years we've been working, applying them, experimenting them, measuring the success of people applying the experiment with them, both in sport and in the corporate world. Rest assured, if you demonstrate these 4 things consistently, people will see you as a better leader, perceive you as a better leader, and therefore you'll be a better leader. So that's the background to it. And out of these, said these top 4 characteristics have been the top 4 pretty much consistently. Out of those 4, the number 1 characteristic is always the number 1 characteristic. And again, statistically, it's 3 times more important than the other 3 put together. So basically, if you get this one right, you're on a very good setting. And actually, if you don't, even if you do the other 3, the top 4, you're probably not going to get people following you with the same energy and intensity. And if I was with a group now, if I get a bit of audience participation, I'd pause and I'd ask people to tell me what they are, what they think the number 1 is, and probably 2/3 of the room would get it right. Kouzes and Posner call it honesty. And actually that put me off a little bit when I initially heard it, because I thought both in business and sport, you can't be 100% honest 100% of the time. And actually, I don't think it would be helpful to be. But when you dig around behind that, and when we've mapped it to other pieces of research and done our own stuff on it, it's more about, are you authentic? Are you congruent? Do your words and actions line up? Are people clear on what you stand for? And therefore, and do your words and actions live up to what you say you stand for? My favourite way of summing it up, and actually it doesn't translate well anywhere outside of the UK, but it's do you do what you say on the tin? Do your words and actions line up? Are you congruent, authentic?
So yeah, as you say, for anybody else, because the Sports Psych show is a global show, I'm proud to say, and do you do what it says on the tin is very much, are you congruent? Are your actions congruent with what you say?
Yeah, years ago, I explained this a lot when I go, especially when I go to work in the States. Years ago, there was a company called Ron Seal, and they made things like varnish and creosote and things like that. And their whole advertising campaign, they'd make Ron Seal quick drying wood stain. It does exactly what it says on the tin. And the whole range was just named exactly what was inside the tin. And that is really what we want from our leaders. We want somebody that we know exactly what they stand for, and they're authentic to it and they're consistent to it. To the degree that we are more likely to follow somebody who's potentially a bit unpleasant, but is at least congruent and authentic about it and honest about it, than somebody who is nicer but a bit a bit beige and a bit bland. So I think on one level that probably sounds quite obvious and straightforward. But the interesting thing is if what people want more than anything else is that they know what you stand for and they can see you living into that, the challenge with that is we have to know exactly what we stand for. And what do we stand for as a leader? So, for example, if I'm working with a group of football managers, and I must have done, Sue Bridgewater will be able to tell me this, but I think I've probably done about 12 or 14 years with the LMA now, asking this question to groups of football
the LMA,
managers.
The League Managers Association.
League Managers Association,
England, aren't they? So the managers, the household names, they're all a member of the LMA, aren't they? Because it's a representative body, and they'll be educated through the LMA as well.
Exactly. They double as they are the union, but they are also the professional body and development body as well. So most professional managers and heads of academy who in this country now, they will probably go through the League Managers Association diploma in management. And I've been running sessions, teaching sessions, leading sessions on leadership on that diploma for about 12 years now. And one of the questions I asked them is, what do you stand for as a leader? If I was to come and work for you, or if I was to come and play for you, or if I was to hire you, how can I expect you to be? How do I expect you to show up every day? What am I going to see and feel that's important? What's your philosophy? And I don't just mean a playing philosophy. I mean an overall philosophy for you as a leader. And it's interesting. The vast majority of those guys will go, I know exactly what I stand for, and people can know exactly what they expect from me, and they'll write down things like, I'll be first in, I'll be last out. I wouldn't ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. I expect hard work. I'll create a team environment. We'll all be in this together, and I don't disagree with any of that. But it's not unique. And actually, what I often do is go, okay, so imagine you're a soccer manager, you're a football manager, you're towards the bottom of the division. You're in a scrape, but you get the chance to sign a striker who's going to score your goals, but is lazy. And everybody knows they're lazy, and they're probably going to miss training occasionally. Do you sign them? And most of the guys and ladies in the room go, yeah, no, of course I would, because it's all about results. And I go, hang on, you've just told me you're all about teamwork and hard work, and then you've signed this person who you're admitting isn't like that. Now I don't follow you. Now I don't see you as authentic and congruent. So it's more than just, what it is that you're going to do, the rules you're going to apply. It's more about what you stand for. It's, goes to a little bit of the core purpose stuff and core belief stuff, which actually takes a bit more thinking to agree on and to work out. But it sounds a bit soft. Some people think it's a bit touchy-feely, but rest assured, without knowing what the answer is and then making sure you're demonstrating it, people won't follow you.
Let me reflect back what I've heard, because I love how this is piecing together. So this research evidence from Barry Posner, and please excuse me, it's Jim, what's Jim's surname?
Jim Kouzes. So if anybody wants to look it up, it's Kouzes. They wrote a brilliant book called The Leadership Challenge. It's a great, best leadership book I've ever read. Great.
So definitely be purchasing a copy there. So Posner and Kouzes, and we'll come on to talk about these other characteristics, but the number one characteristics is three times more powerful: honesty. And you've built on that in terms of, or translated that as authenticity, congruency, clarity. I've written down consistency as well, that consistency between what I'm saying and doing. And what I love, what you've talked about there is, okay, well, what does that mean to me as a leader? How do I build that? And in my world, I translate what you said as, I call them self-skills. Within my psychosocial model of coaching, well, virtually the number one thing is self-skills. And within my package of self-skills are, my values, my beliefs about coaching, if I'm a coach, my values as a coach, my beliefs about coaching, and my objectives. What am I trying to achieve? Because an under-8s coach is going to be trying to achieve something different to an under-18s coach, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So those self skills are imperative. What I hear you say is those self skills are imperative to this number one leadership characteristic of honesty.
Yep, absolutely. And if you look around the world's, certainly again, football, soccer, if I look at some coaches who are very different from each other, but galvanize people, So in the UK, you look at somebody like Neil Warnock, for example.
Yeah.
Now, he's a love-hate character, but people know exactly that there's a reason that there's a tribe of players who will go above and beyond for Neil Warnock, and he can galvanize a group of players because he does exactly what he says on the tin. You know exactly what you're going to get for him. If there are any listeners out in the States who follow soccer, one of my best friends in the world is a guy called James O'Connor, who was the head coach of Louisville in the USL. He then had a spell last season as the head coach of Orlando City in the MLS. He's now back at Louisville in a technical capacity. Louisville, he created, when the franchise went over there, he created 3 rosters, 3 squads from scratch. In fact, it might have been 4, 3 from scratch and then a 4th. They were in either the final or the semi-final of the playoffs every year. Mm-hmm. They won it, I think, twice on a relatively small budget. But look, the guys who he had playing for them there, they've all gone their separate ways after the first couple of seasons, and James, they all went to each other's weddings because he was able to create such an environment. And what was the beginning of that? You work for James, you play for James, you know exactly what you're going to get from James. And he would say it himself, he's not always the warmest, he's not always the he specifically selected his number 2 as somebody who was better at the kind of arm around the shoulder kind of stuff, He's incredibly driven. He's got ridiculously high standards, but people would buy into it because they knew what they were going to get. And, that's, it's understanding how that is in yourself and then manifesting it out.
I'm just thinking there, it's such an important characteristic, isn't it? And it must have implications for who you pick. If you are the leader and you're working in an organisation where you have the opportunity to have a co-coach or a couple of coaches or 3 other coaches, if obviously you're working at the very top organisations, it must have implications for who you choose. Because if you're going to be true to yourself and if you're going to lead authentically, then you are probably better served picking people who have characteristics that complement and augment the way you go about your leadership style.
Yeah, now this is really interesting. So what I'm not an expert on is the kind of the technicalities of ego, but my general observation is the people who are better at understanding what they stand for and getting this number 1 characteristic right are better and more flexible at choosing a staff because they have a greater degree of self-confidence or whatever you want to call that. So if I know what I stand for, then the first thing is I've got to have people around me who stand for the same thing. But I'm also much more likely to be comfortable in selecting people who are also better at certain stuff than I am. And again, I had the pleasure of working with Sam Allardyce for about 3 months when he was at Sunderland. Now again, I'd seen Sam on telly before this. Sam as a character is exactly as you see him on TV. He's very certain of himself, and he's got very, very strong opinions on things. But one of the things that I was really surprised and delighted at when I went into work at Sunderland, he's a really empowering leader. He knows exactly what he stands for. He knows exactly what he's going to do, and very clear on what he expects of others. And having laid that out to everyone, he allows everyone to get on with what they're going to do. And he purposely selects people who are better at the things that they're employed to do than he is. And that's great. And that's, I think it's more difficult to do that if you're not really sure of like who you are as a coach. So I think it's crucial. It's really helpful in choosing your staff around you as well.
It's that self-awareness piece. I mean, when I refer to self-skills, by and large threefold: self-awareness, self-regulation, self-reflection. So self-reflecting and to build self-awareness, knowing yourself.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I don't want to digress into this too much because it might come up again later on. But one of my passions, confidence. I've studied competence and taught competence for about 15 years now. I managed to write a book about it a few years ago. And to me, that comes into that. The whole myth of confidence is that it's something that you get from the outside when you've achieved certain things, look a certain way, have a certain amount of money, play for a certain club, are in a certain relationship, etc., etc. And it's not. It's as you know, it's an emotional state like any of the other emotional states. But one of the things that, and therefore it means you can generate it yourself, in a heartbeat whenever you want, if you just know the simple formula and you practice it. But one of the interesting things that I think takes people a little bit longer to get their head around is that it's also part of our default state. Like, and I know people disagree a little bit about default states, but if you look at the default state of a newborn baby, providing it's dry and fed, it's some version of perfectly fine. And our default is that we're perfectly fine. We if we allow ourselves, we'll revert back to that just feeling okay, the same kind of sensation we get when we sit down in our favorite seats in our house. When people are really aware of that default, really aware of that thing that exists all the time, then it's much easier to hand power out. I'm not sure if that's quite the right phrase, but it's much easier for me to go, actually, Dan, you're amazing at processes. You're amazing at creating processes for psych stuff in a way that I couldn't imagine I'd ever be able to do. Now, that's not me being complimentary for the sake of it. That's just a fact. But I'm totally comfortable saying that to you because I'm confident in what I'm good at. And I'm okay with that. And you know what I mean? And if you take that into the sports world, off the pitch, as a head coach, it means you can go, I'm here to be a head coach. This is what I stand for. This is what my skill set is. Therefore, I shouldn't be doing all of those things. And therefore, I want somebody brilliant to do the other things. On the pitch, as a player or a performer or an athlete, being able to be aware of what you're good at, and it not being an ego-y thing, and being aware of what you can get better at, and it not being an ego-y thing, and in a team sport, being able to accept and acknowledge those things and appreciate what others bring. You get that. I know a little bit about Leicester City at the moment. Not, I haven't been working with them, but I know the assistant manager pretty well. I think a lot of Leicester City's success at the moment is based around this self-awareness, self-regulation. We know what we stand for individually and collectively. We appreciate each other's strengths, and guess what? We're being really successful on the back of it.
And as we're speaking now, Leicester City are second in the Premier League under
Brendan Rodgers.
Brendan Rodgers. Thank you very much, Richard. Brain lapse there. Under Brendan Rodgers' stewardship, and interesting. And I think I don't want to digress too much because I want to come back to his characteristics. I agree. I think from a player's perspective, I think what you're saying is really, really interesting. And I think that when performers know who they are, they celebrate who they are and what their strengths are, and they don't get too wrapped up. I know in the world of sports psychology, modelling other players and looking at other players and learning from them is an interesting and useful process to utilise. However, one doesn't want to become too obsessed by other players and too obsessed by heroes and champions and the very best players in inverted commas, because actually sometimes the more you strive to be that best player, let's say the more as a midfielder I strive to be like Lionel Messi, actually the less confident I become, because I probably can't be Lionel Messi. Yeah. And it genuinely does, in my experience, and I don't know about you, Richard, and again I don't want to go too off the beaten track here or what we're trying to talk about, but I've worked with strikers, for instance, young developing elite strikers who have, for example, obsessed Neymar just as a random name, and a lot of the skills and the tricks and the things they actually strive to do are based on the YouTube clips that they're watching of Neymar, whilst their coaches are trying to get them to do or help them to develop very, very basic fundamentals of the game. And I don't want to sound too hyperbole, but careers are damaged because they're so obsessed by trying to be who they're not. And there's that fine balance between having that dream of being up there with Neymar, but actually being grounded and understanding who I am, and actually building confidence based on who I am and who I can be based on who I am. There's two things in that for me. I absolutely agree 100%. For me, it's a much more useful process to say, right, if I could guarantee you, let's imagine I had a magic wand, I can guarantee you will have your dream move in 3 years' time. What will you do between now and then to absolutely guarantee that you'll be ready to walk onto the pitch for, Barcelona, Chelsea, whoever the dream move might be? What will you do mentally? What will you do physically? What will you do tactically? So how do you be the best you? Is much more useful than trying to be more like Messi, Neymar, Ronaldo, etc. The other thing is, and again, I think it's probably something that I realise more as I get older. But all of those people are racked with their own self-doubt. There's a brilliant story. I was telling this to a group this week. So there's a guy called Neil Gaiman who's an author, a fantasy author. Yeah. And he tells this lovely story where he was at a big arts and performance event with lots of kind of big names and really talented groups and poets and all sorts of performers. And he was actually stood at the back, and he struck up a conversation with the guy stood next to him, and really they got talking because they shared the same first name. And the guy who he was speaking to was saying, you're a brilliant author, you're about to do a reading, this band's on and they're amazing. The guy before was a fantastic poet. Like, I don't know why the hell they've got me here. I'm not talented in anything. And Neil Gaiman turned to him and said, yeah, but you were the first man on the moon. So most of us, and I kind of go, yeah, if Neil Armstrong can have imposter syndrome, maybe we should just get over trying to be something different and just be more okay with ourselves. Because then if I'm okay to come back to that first character, so I'm just broadly clear on who I am, what I stand for, as a player, what my abilities are, and then look to build on me and develop me, then that just feels to me like a much more useful process. Number one is honesty. What's number two?
So interestingly, over the years, number 2, 3, and 4 have swapped places a little bit. So, I'll give you my favourite order. So number 2 is that we want our leaders to be forward-facing or future-focused. So at a very kind of simple level, we want we want our leaders to spend more time talking about the future rather than the past. Now, again, I think there is a psychological reason for this and a practical reason for this. So from a psychological, in the broader sense point of view, if you think about, we talk about wanting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We get a degree of certainty from looking forward and going, that's what we're aiming for, that's what we're moving towards, that's where we're going. We actually very rarely get certainty and comfort from looking backwards. Because if the past was really good, we know we ain't going back there. And if the past was really bad, looking back and revisiting it isn't much fun either. Now, I'm not saying that self-reflection isn't a good thing. It's a very, very, very good thing. But it's not never looking back. But in terms of leadership, we want our leaders to spend more time talking about the future rather than the past. And from a very practical level, again, if I take soccer, take football as an example, if I look at most clubs, most teams, they spend much more of their time on past analysis than any sort of future-facing activity, And I know it's, you can't pull out a DVD of what's going to happen in next week's game. But there's a slightly different twist on this. How interesting would it be to have a group of players who you have a much greater balance of us watching stuff that we've done really, really well versus all the stuff we did badly last week and and all the good stuff that our opponents did last week. So it's an interesting one, and I think it's in certain situations and environments it's more difficult as well. If you work at a club with a real rich history, it can be more of a challenge than if if you're setting up a new franchise, or with a group of players you've worked with for a longer period of time. It can be more difficult to be forward facing unless you make it a real purpose to be so. But we want our leaders to spend more time talking about the future rather than the past.
The word that springs to mind there is vision.
Mm-hmm.
So helping your people,
mm-hmm.
and in our case in sports is our players, have an exciting vision for what's coming up in the future, and that could be next week, it could be the next month. That's kind of how I'm interpreting that. I'm interpreting what you've said, and as somebody, I must admit, who when I speak to individuals, I do talk about, reflect on your best games and your strengths. But that's very much a one-to-one internal thing, and I think what I hear you say is that when you're leading a group of people, yes, we can go through a process of appreciative inquiry. What have we been doing well these past 4 months? That's helped us to win. You can do that. But just as powerful, maybe even more powerful from what you're saying is, well, what does the next month look like? Let's imagine that we win all 4 of our games. How exciting is that over the next month? What are we doing over those 4 games to help us win those games? That is sort of where my brain is when you're speaking about forward facing.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. In our roles on the kind of mental side, I think it's even more important. But part of what I tend to do from working in a club is I spend some time in the dressing room listening to managers and helping them with their language, or helping coaches with their language out on the pitch, and which as I know you do and have as well. And again, if I was to draw a pie chart in the typical team meeting, for example, the kind of night before the game team meeting, there'll be great emphasis on what happened in the past. We might be talking about the next game, but on the whole, the managers will be referencing last time we played them, last week's game, the game 2 weeks ago when we conceded 2 just after the break. And it's not what our players and our performers and the people who we are leading, it's not what they want. They want more about the future rather than the past.
Interesting. Yeah, no, absolutely.
One of the things that one of my colleagues does really well, he talks about leadership with a big L and leadership with a little l. So leadership with a big L, when it comes to forward facing, is the vision stuff. Beginning of the season, mid-season, 3-year visions that we can all get behind. And then leadership with a little L when it comes to forward facing is in the water cooler conversations, as we're passing in the training ground, as we're grabbing somebody and having that 5 or 10 minute chat with them. Can we just do a little self-audit where we go, are we spending, in this conversation, Do we spend more time talking about training tomorrow, or do we spend it talking about training yesterday? Next week's game, last week's game, and we can use your term, self-regulate ourselves to shift that dial a little bit. And when we do, people will follow us with more energy and intensity, enthusiasm.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I'm kind of picturing a room full of players and the manager or the head coach just asking players to share what a successful day tomorrow looks like. Just building that vision.
And making it, and again, I know you and I agree on this kind of passionately, making it the norm. For me, the mental stuff is all about habit. It's the 5 minutes a day, it's the 10 minutes a day, not waiting until you're out of form or out the team or you've got an issue. And for me, it's making it one of the norm, so players aren't going, oh my goodness, why are we doing a 10-minute visualization about the next game? It's great if you've got a group of players who can do that with, but as you say, making it right. How do we want tomorrow to be? What's it going to be like? What do we want to be saying tomorrow when we come off the pitch? How do we want to be with each other? Because then actually, if you get that, and I did this, I did a little bit of work with Anthony Pulis last year, and this is one of the things that we were talking about with his guys, because he had a great bunch of guys, and results just weren't going, for a small period. And I said, if you start off with just that end point for next game or the next 3 games, then if you want to, you can build in technical and tactical instructions that would then help them to get there. But the conversation is much more about the future, rather than saying, remember when we gave the ball away and conceded that goal through that mistake when we were playing that game two weeks ago. It's a much healthier and more productive way of getting to the same point. Yeah,
I'm kind of pausing and thinking, I suppose, and thinking quite slowly, I guess, as you're speaking, because I'm just trying to put this with reference or reflect with reference to anxiety and being towards rather than being away from. It almost feels like the past is away from and the future is towards, and we want to help everybody's noses point towards. I'm thinking of threat versus challenge. We want to work towards challenge. I'm just kind of framing this with reference to anxiety and theories of stress, I suppose.
God, great question. Again, in my kind of mental model, you can be towards and give yourself loads of fear. So actually, it's a really good point. Something for players to be careful of, and I guess coaches and people listening to look out for. So my view on, if I call it fear, and I know there's different elements of it, but my view on fear is that it's impossible for us to feel fear in the moment. So as I'm sat in my office here now, if somebody came in here now and grabbed a knife and held it to my throat, I would feel fear, but I wouldn't feel fear about having a knife to my throat. I'd feel fear about what I was imagining was going to happen next. Because I share an office with my best friend, and if he came in here now and held a knife to my throat, I'd wonder what he was doing, but I wouldn't feel fear because I don't think he's got it in it to do, anything grim with it. And if he did, I wouldn't feel fear. Or if I did, I would feel fear about what was going to happen next. So for me, the kind of mastery of imagined fear, because I always give the health warning. Look, fear is a really good thing. If you're walking down a dark alley and you hear footsteps behind you, you get afraid. That's probably a good thing. Run. But the unhealthful fear that limits performance, players and people in organizations as well. People in organizations, many of them live in absolute fear and anxiety only because of what they're imagining is going to go wrong. You can only feel fear if you're imagining it, whatever the it is, going wrong. And this is why, I know this is kind of slightly controversial. I've never met anybody who actually needs to be taught how to visualize. I think there are people who can be helped them to kind of mentally rehearse better, so they're understanding they're taking it in their senses more. But we can, if I say now to anybody listening to this, picture your front door, they'll picture the front door. I think what is effective for players and performers and coaches and people in business and athletes and in kids and in every walk of life is, are you imagining, are you mentally rehearsing, are you visualizing it, whatever the it is, going well? Because, yeah, it's why like this research has been done a few times. I think the last survey was 2014, where they went out across the UK and in the US and asked, what is the most, like, what are you afraid of? And they compiled a table of the most common fears. Number one on the list was public speaking. Number two on the list was death. So Dan, people would rather die than do yours and my job, but like, why? It doesn't make sense on a kind of very objective level. Why would people be more afraid of standing up in front of a room full of people than dying? But it's because we're better at imagining all of the ways that public speaking can go wrong than we are imagining the other stuff. So to go back to your point, there's definitely something about towards and away from. I notice that when people are away from, they can get more fired up about moving, but it's a slightly more painful process. But we can be forward-facing and still instill fear. We can be forward-facing and still create fear in ourselves. So when it comes to the stuff that we do and we want our players and performance and athletes to do, the thing is that when we are visualizing, mentally rehearsing, looking forward, that we're making sure we're really focusing on all the stuff that's going well.
Brilliant. And I think I've sorted this out in my mind, because I think that what I perhaps wanted to say was that forward-facing notion. I'm a leader and I help my people face forward. I'm helping them create a helpful, constructive, positive, if you like, adaptive narrative, a narrative that helps, essentially. That's, I think, at least for me in my personal world, my lens, that's how I've sorted out that forward-facing notion.
Yeah, and there's just one other, I know we want to move on to the other ones, but there's one other little kind of nuance that I've noticed in the football world, in the soccer world, which again, I don't know if it's your experience, Dan, but I think most players, it's a big generalization, but if I was to do a pie chart, I think most players are broadly towards motivated. And if I was to do a pie chart of most managers, especially our head coaches, especially ones that have been in that role for a year or two, they seem to be away from. And it's really weird, because most head coaches and managers are ex-players. But there just seems to be something in the transition where, as a player, they're sat going, it's all about how high up the table we can go, how far we can go. Let's see how close to the top six we can get. Let's see how many goals we can score. And then as a manager, they're going, let's avoid relegation. Yeah. And it's, I find it funny, but actually it also creates, especially I think early in the season, pre-season, early in the season, it can create a misalignment, because the manager thinks they're like motivating the guys and going, we need to get 33 points or 40 points, or we need to, let's make sure we're above this line. And the players are going, no, let's aim for the top three, and we kind of know we're not going to get there, but let's let's start out to beat everybody. And again, if you're listening to this and you're a manager, you coach at any level, I think it's something to look out for. So.
Brilliant. Number 3.
Well, if you were to do a list of, guess at a list of leadership characteristics, everybody would have this on, I think. We want our leaders to be inspiring. Now, here's the thing with inspiring. I think it's misunderstood, because most of us are brought up to think that what we mean by inspiring is we want our leaders to be fist pumping and chest thumping and, be the big guy on the stage, giving the rah-rah speech. And the good news for most people is that's not what we mean by inspiring. if you go back to the roots of the word inspire, one of the I want to say Greek, I might have that wrong, but one of the roots of the word is to breathe life into. What we want as a follower, what we want from our leader is that they leave us with more energy than we had before the interaction with them on a consistent basis. It's so important. I'll say it again. We, as a leader, our job is to leave people with more energy than they had before the interaction with us on a consistent basis. So that doesn't matter, again, whether it's the water cooler conversation, whether it's the way you walk across the training room, or whether it is the team meetings or the 5 or 10 minutes before people go out and perform, or the conversation you have with a gymnast before they go and do their thing. It's about leaving them with more energy. And the good thing then is, if we know what we stand for as a leader, and we've got those core things you referred to earlier on, then we've got more idea of how we do that. How we can lead their state with our state. It does mean we've got to go first. And it's one of the things that I consistently am teaching people, because I think it's crucial how we manage our emotional states to be able to lead theirs. But again, so many people, you've been around it, Dan, so many people drain people's energy. Everyone listen to this, will be able to picture somebody that they've worked for in the past, or worked with in the past, hopefully in the past, that if they walked in the room without even saying anything, they just walked in the room, walked out of it, they would suck the life out of the room. And hopefully you'd be able to imagine somebody that if they walked in your room without even really saying anything, they'd bring energy to it. And that can be done quietly as well as, very expressively, but it's got to be a habit. Leave people with more energy. That's what being inspiring is.
And for me, I think you can do that. As you say, you don't have to be that gregarious extrovert.
No.
You can do it quietly, can't you, Richard? You can do it linguistically. For example, just asking open questions. An open question could be as simple as, tell me about you at your best. And when you ask that question, you're helping the player open up pictures that can evoke great feelings. And going back to your definition, well, they're probably going to leave the room feeling good about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I look at some of the people who I find inspiring in that way, leaving me with more energy. No, they're not, they're necessarily a real high energy person, but there's something in the linguistics. There's physiology for me is enormous in it. How people walk, how people move, sit, stand. I did a modelling project years ago in my very, very early days, probably about 2004. I did a modelling project around charisma. And one of the things that I found, like if you got to this single nub, it turned out to be really, the one most consistent thing was that we found that charismatic people just had more definite gestures. They used more definite gestures. They didn't necessarily use bigger gestures, but the gestures they used were more definite. And there's a little bit about vocal tone, but one of the guys I trained years ago, and again it was in a corporate environment. He was a chef actually, and we did some work. And then when we met back together as a group, he was like, and I was asking the group, what have they applied and what have they had a biggest success with? And he said that my biggest success was how I walked in the office in the morning. I would walk in the office, and in the past I'd walk in, and my vocal tone would be, not too bad, but I'd slouch my way across the room to the kitchens, and now I walk in and I walk with purpose and I say good morning to people. He said it's nothing complicated, but it's been the impact that it's had on the people around him has been really significant, And I think if I look at coaches on the sidelines, again, when I'm working with somebody, one of the things I watch is how are they on the sidelines? How are they on the sidelines? And for me, it's not saying you should sit down or you should sit up or you should be quiet or you should be, You don't have to be Jurgen Klopp. You don't have to be Chris Hughton. You don't have to be, Gareth Southgate or Eddie Howe or I don't know, somebody else who kind of shouts and balls. There's a bit of it. It's about authenticity, going back to the first point. But for me, it's more about down on the ground and you hold your head in your hands and then you wonder why their performance has been impacted on it. And is how you are reacting likely to have a positive impact on the emotional state of the players on the pitch, or is it likely to have a negative impact on the players on the pitch? I sometimes wish managers and coaches would be more thoughtful about that. Not to be a good person, but to get more from the performance of their players. It's a pretty fundamental thing. I even going into a dressing room at halftime. I've sat and watched first half performances where the players are obviously in some version of overwhelm. They're restricted in their performances. Their energy levels are down, and it's obviously a tension thing. And the manager comes bowling in, shouting about, why don't you just relax? The ball, keep hold of the ball. Just, you've forgotten everything we've worked on. Just calm down. And I just think, and sometimes I played it back to them directly when the relationship was being strong. I just thought, what part of that was going to relax players enough to be able to perform, and going back to being inspiring? What part of that is going to leave them with more energy for the second half?
Well, I think this is so well said, and as you're speaking, I'm thinking here. I'm actually thinking about how people tend to define coaching, and we're talking about coaches as leaders here. And I think we get, and I've said this, I suppose, countless times on the Sports Psych show, we tend to define coaching as I have a lot of information in my head and I have to impart this information on you, my people, on you, my players. And so we become, coaching then becomes about fixing people, and I'm just trying to relate this to being inspiring and how difficult it can be. I'm sure that if we work from this premise of coaching is about fixing people, it's very difficult to be inspiring when we're saying, well, you're doing this wrong, you need to do it this way. That's not particularly inspiring, is it? And we can all argue that there is a time and a place to help people, to give them, offer instruction, to give them advice, but it very much does lend towards more of either a person or a player-driven approach, which is finding the right, maybe open question and getting them to come up with their solution. And when you empower them to come up with their solution, there's more chance of you coming across as an inspiring leader, maybe.
Yeah, again, it's a great point, Dan. And look, if you're at the grassroots, if you're certainly in youth football, development football, recreational football, there is just not enough of that helping players work it out for themselves, enabling players to come up with the answers themselves. For a while, I say this humbly, it's not a brag, it's just a fact. For a while, I was working in the Premier League, advising, working alongside somebody who was going to go on to, went on to be an England manager, albeit briefly, and at the same time, I was managing a team in what you would, if I work my way down, would be the equivalent of Division 14. Yep. Those lads were paying to play, not the other way around.
Yep.
So, and I've got a boy who's now 11 who is, started to play football at the grassroots, and there's not enough at the grassroots side. There's too much ego. There's not enough people who are willing to go, let's make it about the players and be a facilitator of the players' growth and development. And I've got to say, my kid's coach is brilliant at that. He ever since they started at 7, he's gone, this isn't about winning games. What I want is a bunch of kids who can play football successfully at 15. And if that means we lose a lot of games between now and then, I'm not bothered, because they're not going to go on to be pros. What I want is for them to have a good, inverted commas, career at a local level. What I do understand is that there's a tension at every level, but especially the higher up you go, and especially at elite level, where we want players to be very specific in a system and in an approach. So there's a tension in giving that direction versus allowing them just to, come up with it for themselves. But I hate jumping on bandwagons, because this could all come crashing down tomorrow, or certainly the end of the season. As we speak right now, Liverpool are, I can't remember, 22 points clear at the top of the Premier League. It feels like 1 billion points clear. Now Klopp is obviously a great tactician, I assume. I'd never worked alongside him, don't know anyone who has. He's made some very good signings. But Liverpool aren't where they are, I don't believe, because of Klopp's tactical ability or because he signed Van Dijk. Because people forget Van Dijk was a risk when he signed him, especially for the money he signed him. Doesn't look like it now, but he was at the time. There is something that Klopp does in creating a culture that gets people to do more and run further, and all the stuff we hear from Liverpool. And when I work with groups of managers, one of the questions I ask every group or the points I make is that I bet you know everything about the players in your dressing room, and I bet you know very little about the people in your dressing room. And to me, when you're working with millions of pounds worth of talent, or hundreds of £1,000s worth of talent, that's not very bright. We should know the people that we are working with at least as well as the players we're working with. Because we know about the people, we'll be able to work with them much better as a player.
Well said.
And I know it sounds very obvious, Dan. I know when I'm sitting here, it sounds very obvious, but I just see it time and time again. I go, well, what about him? It tells about him. Yeah, no, he's quick and he's good in the air. No. I want to tell us about him. What am I working with here? And then when you get under that, then it makes the working with the player a bit more ABC for me.
Well, I'm certainly fairly confident that Jurgen Klopp is probably honest and forward-facing and inspiring. And if he's going to be something else, what's that fourth characteristic that he's probably going to be?
Yeah. So this is probably, I think actually it's the most complicated one to grasp. So we want our leaders to be experts. We want our leaders to be competent. But it's competent not as a subject matter expert. It's competent as a leader. Essentially what we want when we look at our leaders is we want to look at them and feel like they've got what it takes to move us from where we are today to where we need to be. So in some ways, it's a combination of the other things. And again, if I translate it into our environment, there are loads of amazing tacticians out there. There are at whatever level we're at, pretty much everyone else around us will have the same qualifications. If we're at an elite level, other people will have won what we've won, or managed big clubs, or whatever qualifies you. But it's how we demonstrate to other people. If we want to be a leader, how we demonstrate to other people that we've got a combination of things that's going to take us from wherever we are now to wherever we agree we want to be.
Can I tell you what word's coming into my head as a variable here is context?
Mm-hmm.
Because as you said, it's not competence in terms of maybe knowledge, because I just wonder. I can think. I mean, we're talking a lot of soccer, football today, but if we stick on that theme, I just wonder if an incredible tactician and we can think of some of those managers, head coaches. You take them down to League Two conference, which would be the 5th division in England. And maybe some people might disagree with me here, I don't know, but tactics at that level, whilst they're not irrelevant, I just wonder if that's not necessarily the main competence to have, whereas it may be more of the main competence to have in the Premier League. The context is different. So I'm just thinking, as a follower, as a person who's being led, I'm looking at that leader and I'm assessing whether that leader has the contextual competence to get us, as you say, from point A to point B.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I've been around clubs and been around players even where a manager's gone in, and even just their style of play is so different to the style of play of the previous manager, and the players are going, well, that's all very well and good that you want us to high press, but actually we've got a group of players who've been, bought and coached to play on the break for the last 3 years. So what are you going to do now? It sounds really fundamental to say the best boxers don't necessarily make the best boxing coaches, or the best gymnasts don't make the best gymnastic coaches, and the best rugby players don't make the best rugby coaches necessarily, etc., etc. But I do often see people going into clubs and assuming because they were a really good performer, whether it was a footballer or a cricketer. Actually, cricket's a really good example of it. It'd be an amazing bowler, but that doesn't mean you can teach anybody else to be a brilliant bowler. Nor does it mean that people should listen to you just because you took 300 wickets. Now, that might be a useful addition alongside some, if you walk in and go, this is what I stand for, this is what you're going to get from me, this is how I'm going to show up every day, this is what you can expect, and this is what you can expect me to demand of you, because this is where I want to take you and us. Here, well, we're here, but where I want to get to is there. And you do it with an energy that people feel, and you've taken 300 wickets, people are likely to well and truly jump on the bus. But I do see people who just rely on it. And actually, if I was to be a tiny little bit of controversial, as I'm sure there's tons of aspiring sports psychs listening. I've been around a lot of clubs, so I haven't got any qualifications. I probably shouldn't say that, but I don't have any formal qualifications. I've studied hard, I've read more, and I'll put my knowledge up against anybody's. But I've been in clubs where there are incredibly clever, incredibly qualified sports psychs who are incredibly frustrated, and it's because they were just relying on the fact they were qualified as an assumption that would mean that people would trust them enough to put them in front of a group of players. So, even if you're in that kind of, if that's your aspiration to, if you listen to your aspirations do the kind of things that dance does so well, then actually develop your leadership, your own personal leadership framework, those self skills, that means that people will buy you, that the manager of the club you speak to or the head of the academy that you speak to will buy into you as a person, and you're influencing them as a leader, with your leadership skills. And the fact that you're then highly knowledgeable, highly skilled, and highly qualified becomes the tool with which you work with the players or the groups or the individuals or the performers. But that competence alone isn't enough for people to follow you.
Well said, Richard. And I think that's a fantastic piece of advice, having been in the industry for a couple of decades. I completely agree. Mate, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. I hope it's been really useful for everyone listening.
Fascinating 4 characteristics there. I certainly know I'm going to go and get that book. If people want to get in touch, and I know that quite a few will, how can people get in contact with you, mate?
So they're welcome to email. You can get me at richard@21leadership.com. It's 21 in words. So you're welcome to email me with any questions. I'll certainly come back. I won't always come back quickly, but I'll always come back. I'm on Twitter. You can follow me at Richard Nugent. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, you're more than welcome to get in touch with any questions.
Fantastic. Richard, thank you so much for your time, mate. That was awesome.
It's a pleasure.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that show, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. Well, I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.